The crimson sunset painted Dakota Territories, sky as Jessamine Morgan clutched the crumpled letter to her chest, her heart heavy with grief. The year was 1878, and the woman who had once had everything was now left with nothing but a homestead claim and the clothes on her back. The stagecoach had deposited her unceremoniously at the edge of a town, barely deserving of the name Redemption Creek, with nothing but promise of a new beginning that felt more like a sentence than salvation. Jessamine's gloved hands trembled as she surveyed the dusty main street. Merchants were closing shop for the evening. Cowboys stumbled toward the saloon, and nobody paid any mind to the woman in the faded blue traveling dress standing alone with her single trunk. Her late husband's debts had forced her west, to this remote claim he'd purchased before typhoid took him 3 months prior. "Madam, you look lost." The voice came from behind her, deep and resonant. She turned to find a man atop a chestnut stallion, silhouetted against the dying light. His face was shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but his posture spoke of confidence and capability. "I'm looking for the Tucker property," she said, striving to keep her voice steady. "I'm told it's a few miles north of town." The man was silent for a moment. "The old Tucker place." "Nobody's lived there for years." "Well, someone does now," Jessamine replied with more conviction than she felt. "I do." He dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. And as he stepped closer, the last rays of sunlight illuminated features weathered by wind and sun. Despite the hardness of his jaw and the caution in his eyes, there was something kind in his expression that made Jessamine's heart flutter unexpectedly. "Isaac Blackwood," he said, extending a calloused hand. "Sheriff of this modest establishment we call Redemption Creek." "Jessamine Morgan," she replied, taking his hand briefly. "Widow and now apparently homesteader." Isaac's eyes, a startling blue against his tanned skin, studied her face. "That place isn't fit for living, Mrs. Morgan. Hasn't been for years." Exhaustion and desperation made her words sharper than intended. "I have nowhere else to go, Sheriff, so it will have to be fit enough." A muscle worked in his jaw. "It's nearly dark. You can't go out there now." He glanced at her trunk. "The boarding house is full with the cattle buyers in town, but—" He seemed to wrestle with something before continuing. "I have a spare room above my office. You can stay there tonight and I'll take you to your property in the morning." Pride urged her to refuse, but practicality won out. "That's most kind of you, Sheriff." As Isaac loaded her trunk onto his horse, Jessamine caught the curious glances of townspeople. A woman alone in the West was vulnerable in ways she was only beginning to understand, and she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake coming here. The sheriff's office was a simple wooden structure with a jail cell at the back and living quarters above. Isaac carried her trunk up the narrow stairs, showing her to a small but clean room. "It's not much," he said, setting down her belongings. "It's more than I expected," she answered truthfully. The journey west had taught her to temper her expectations. He nodded, his expression unreadable. "There's a washroom down the hall. I'll be downstairs if you need anything." Alone, Jessamine sank onto the narrow bed, finally allowing tears to fall. The letter from the bank in Boston, the funeral, the humiliation of learning her husband's gambling debts had left her destitute. It all crashed over her like a wave. But beneath the grief was something steelier: determination. She had come too far to surrender now. Morning came with the smell of coffee and bacon. Jessamine dressed carefully in her second-best dress, a practical brown cotton with minimal trim, and pinned her chestnut hair into a simple knot before descending the stairs. Isaac stood at a small stove in the corner of the office, frying bacon in a cast-iron pan. He glanced up as she entered, and for a moment, Something like appreciation flickered in his eyes before he masked it. "Thought you might be hungry before we head out," he said, gesturing to the small table where 2 tin plates waited. "Thank you." She sat, suddenly aware of how hungry she was. The bacon was crisp, the eggs perfectly cooked, and the coffee strong enough to fortify her for whatever lay ahead. They ate in companionable silence until Isaac spoke. "Mrs. Morgan, I feel I should warn you. The Tucker place. It's in bad shape. No one's lived there since old man Tucker died 3 years back. My husband purchased it 6 months ago," she said. "He never mentioned its condition." Isaac's expression darkened slightly. Some land agents aren't particular about the truth when selling to Easterners. The implication that her husband had been swindled stung, but Jessamine merely nodded. "Regardless, it's all I have now." They set out an hour later, Isaac on his horse and Jessamine perched on a wagon he'd borrowed for her trunk. The journey took them through rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers, the beauty of the landscape at odds with the anxiety churning in her stomach. When they crested a small hill, Isaac pulled his horse to a stop. "There it is." Jessamine's heart sank. The homestead was little more than a dilapidated cabin with a sagging roof, surrounded by overgrown fields and a broken-down corral. A single ancient apple tree stood sentinel beside it, its gnarled branches reaching toward the sky like beseeching arms. "Oh," was all she could manage. Isaac watched her carefully. "I can take you back to town if you'd like, maybe arrange passage east on the next stage." Pride straightened her spine. "No, this is my property, and I intend to make it my home." His eyes held a mixture of respect and concern. "It'll be hard work for anyone, let alone a woman alone." "I'm stronger than I look, Sheriff," she said, taking up the reins, "and I have little choice but to try." The interior of the cabin was worse than its exterior suggested. Dust and cobwebs cloaked every surface, the floorboards creaked ominously, and a family of mice had clearly made themselves at home. But the stone fireplace was solid, and the roof, despite its sag, didn't appear to leak. Isaac helped her bring in her trunk, then stood awkwardly in the center of the single room. "I can't in good conscience leave you here like this," he said finally. "I appreciate your concern, but at least let me help you make it habitable," he interrupted. "I have some boards at my place that could fix that roof, and I know where to get a decent stove." Jessamine wanted to refuse. She'd relied on a man before her husband and been left with nothing, but the practicality that had gotten her this far prevailed. "I can pay you once I sell some of the furniture my husband left in storage in Boston." Something like hurt flashed across his face. "I'm not asking for payment, Mrs. Morgan, just being neighborly." Over the next 2 weeks, Isaac arrived each morning after his rounds, helping Jessamine repair the cabin and clear the overgrown fields. They worked side by side, their initial wariness giving way to a comfortable rhythm. Isaac taught her to split firewood, mend fences, and identify which wild plants were edible. In return, Jessamine cooked meals that were a far cry from the bacon and beans he usually subsisted on. The townsfolk whispered, of course. A widow and the sheriff, spending days alone at her remote homestead, it was fodder for gossip. But Isaac seemed unconcerned, and Jessamine found she cared less with each passing day. One evening, as the setting sun turned the prairie to gold, they sat on the newly repaired porch, drinking coffee. "Why did you become sheriff?" Jessamine asked, watching his profile in the fading light. Isaac was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. "I killed a man," he said finally, his voice low. "Not as sheriff, before. He deserved it, was rustling cattle and murdered a family when they caught him at it. But taking a life, even one that needs taking, it changes you." He turned to look at her, his eyes reflecting the last light of day. I became sheriff because I wanted to protect people without having to kill again. Mostly succeeds. Jessamine nodded, understanding more than she could express. They all carried burdens from their pasts. And you? He asked. What brings a Boston lady to the Dakota Territory alone? She sighed, tracing the rim of her cup. My husband, Charles, was not the man I thought I married. He gambled, accumulated debts. When typhoid took him, the creditors took everything else. This land was all that remained. He'd bought it in his brother's name, so the banks couldn't touch it. You loved him. The question was gentle, without judgment. I thought I did, she answered honestly. Now I wonder if I loved the idea of him more than the man himself. Does that make me terrible? Makes you human, Isaac replied. We all have dreams that don't match reality. As twilight deepened into night, Jessamine felt something shift between them, a boundary crossed, a trust established. And when Isaac left that night, his good night seemed to carry more weight than before. Spring warmed into summer, and the homestead slowly transformed under their joint efforts. Jessamine planted a vegetable garden, acquired 6 chickens from a neighboring farm, and even managed to repair the old well with Isaac's guidance. The cabin, once forlorn, now boasted curtains at the windows, a sturdy roof, and floors that no longer threatened to give way. Her presence in Redemption Creek had become accepted, if not entirely understood. She sold eggs in town weekly, attending church on Sundays and gradually forming friendships with several of the women. But it was her friendship with Isaac that sustained her through the difficult days when the roof leaked during a thunderstorm, or when coyotes took 2 of her precious chickens. On a sweltering July afternoon, Isaac arrived with an unexpected gift, a rocking chair he'd crafted himself from oak. Thought you might like somewhere proper to sit on your porch, he said gruffly, setting it down and avoiding her gaze. Jessamine ran her hands over the smooth wood, touched beyond words. Isaac, it's beautiful. You made this, he nodded, a faint flush visible beneath his tan. My pa was a carpenter, taught me before he passed. Thank you, she said softly, meeting his eyes. Something electric passed between them, a current of unspoken feelings that had been building for months. Isaac cleared his throat. Thought I might stay for supper if you're amenable. I'd like that, she replied, her heart beating faster than the situation warranted. That evening, as they ate at her small table, conversation flowed easily between them. Isaac told stories of his childhood in Missouri, of learning to track from a half-Cherokee friend of his father's, of his dreams of someday having land of his own. Jessamine shared memories of Boston, of the library where she'd spent countless hours, of her passion for teaching that had been set aside when she married. You could teach here, Isaac suggested. Town's growing. More families arriving every month. The children need proper schooling. Perhaps, Jessamine mused, warming to the idea. Once I've gotten the homestead properly established. As the evening wore on, a comfortable silence fell between them. Isaac's gaze lingered on her face in a way that made her cheeks warm. I should go, he said finally, though he made no move to rise. It's late, Jessamine heard herself say. The ride back to town is long in the dark. Their eyes met across the table, the invitation hanging in the air between them. Isaac reached across, his calloused fingers brushing hers. Jessamine. A pounding at the door shattered the moment. Isaac was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the gun at his hip. Sheriff, a voice called. Sheriff Blackwood, you in there? Isaac opened the door to reveal a young man on horseback, breathing hard. It's the Hargrove gang, Sheriff. They just rode into town, shot up the saloon. 3 men hurt bad. The tenderness vanished from Isaac's face, replaced by the hard look of a lawman. I'll be right there. He turned to Jessamine. Lock your doors after I leave, if I'm not back by morning. Go, she said, understanding the duty that called him. "Be careful." He nodded once, then was gone, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the night. Jessamine bolted the door as instructed, then stood in the middle of her small cabin, the evening's warmth dissipating with his absence. 3 days passed with no word from Isaac. Anxiety gnawed at Jessamine as she went about her chores, jumping at every distant sound that might herald his return. On the 4th morning, unable to bear the uncertainty any longer, she hitched her neighbor's borrowed mare to the wagon and set out for town. Redemption Creek was unnaturally quiet when she arrived. The saloon's windows were boarded up, and several men stood in small groups, talking in low voices. Jessamine approached the sheriff's office with trepidation, her heart in her throat. The door was ajar. Inside, a young deputy she recognized as Billy Hawkins sat at Isaac's desk, his arm in a sling. He looked up as she entered, his expression grim. "Mrs. Morgan," he said, rising awkwardly. "Sheriff's not here." "Where is he?" Her voice sounded strange to her own ears. Billy's eyes slid away from hers. "Hargrove gang ambushed him and 2 others who went after them. Tom Ellis made it back yesterday, said the sheriff took 2 bullets pushing him out of the line of fire." The world tilted beneath her feet. Is he dead?" "Don't rightly know, madam. Ellis said he was alive when they got separated, but bleeding bad. The posse from Clearwater's still looking." Jessamine gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. "I want to join the search." "Madam, that's no place for a. I was raised hunting with my father in the Berkshires," she interrupted, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. "I can track, I can shoot, and I know that country north of my homestead better than most. I'm going." Billy looked as though he might argue, then sighed. "Ellis said they were near Eagle Ridge when they got separated. That's about 15 miles northwest of your place." Jessamine nodded, already calculating what supplies she would need. "I'll leave within the hour." By noon, she was riding north, a rifle across her saddle and provisions for 3 days packed behind her. The summer heat was oppressive, but fear for Isaac drove her forward. She knew the area he described, a rocky outcropping overlooking a creek where she and Isaac had picnicked just weeks before. The first day of searching yielded nothing. Jessamine made camp as dusk fell, tethering the mare nearby and building a small fire. Sleep eluded her as she stared up at the vast canopy of stars, wondering if Isaac was looking at the same sky or if he was beyond seeing anything at all. Dawn broke with the promise of another scorching day. Jessamine packed her meager camp and continued north, scanning the ground for any sign of passage. By midday, she'd found tracks 3 horses, moving fast, heading west along the creek. She followed, hope kindling in her chest. The sun was low on the horizon when she spotted it, a thin wisp of smoke rising from a copse of trees near the water. Jessamine approached cautiously, rifle ready, her heart pounding. What she saw made her breath catch. Isaac, propped against a tree, his shirt dark with dried blood, a small fire smoldering beside him. His eyes were closed, his face pale beneath his tan. "Isaac," she whispered, dropping to her knees beside him. His eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to recognition. "Jessamine. Am I dreaming?" "No," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks as she examined his wounds. A bullet had grazed his temple and another had torn through his side, but neither appeared fatal if infection hadn't set in. "I'm here, I came to find you." "Hargrove," he murmured. "Got away, couldn't follow, too weak." "Hush now," she soothed, wetting a cloth from her canteen to clean his wounds. "We need to get you back. Can you ride?" With Jessamine's help, Isaac managed to mount her horse. She walked beside them, leading the mare slowly back toward the homestead, which was closer than town. Night fell before they'd covered half the distance, forcing them to make camp again. As Jessamine tended the fire, Isaac watched her through half-lidded eyes. "You shouldn't have come looking for me," he said. "Too dangerous." She met his gaze steadily. "I could not come." Something shifted in his expression, understanding, perhaps, or surrender. "Why?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning. Jessamine moved to kneel beside him, her hand finding his in the firelight. "Because I care for you, Isaac. More than I should, perhaps." His fingers tightened around hers. "Jessamine, I'm not a man who has much to offer. Just a badge and a rented room above a jail." "I don't need offerings," she said softly. "I just need you to live." They reached the homestead by midday the following day. Jessamine helped Isaac into her bed, then rode to fetch the doctor from town. By nightfall, Isaac's wounds had been properly cleaned and stitched, and though fever made him restless, the doctor assured Jessamine that with proper care, he would recover. For a week, she barely left his side, changing bandages, coaxing broth between his lips and cooling his brow when fever raged. On the 8th day, the fever broke, and Isaac woke lucid for the first time since their return. "You're still here," he said, his voice rough from disuse. Jessamine smiled, relief washing over her. "Where else would I be? Thought maybe I dreamed you finding me," he admitted. "Or that you'd come to your senses and left." "Left for where?" she asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Anywhere. Back east. Somewhere with proper society, not a half-wild territory with a sheriff who can't even catch a gang of outlaws." Jessamine shook her head. "This is my home now, and you did your duty. No one could ask more." His hand found hers, calluses against the new roughness of her once smooth skin. "When I was lying out there, thinking I might die, all I could think about was you, about things I should have said." Her heart quickened. "What things?" "That I love you," he said simply. "That from the moment you stood in the street with your trunk and your determination, I was lost." Tears welled in Jessamine's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have for a long time." His kiss was gentle, a promise more than a passion, but it sealed something between them that Jessamine knew would not easily be broken. As summer waned into autumn, Isaac recovered his strength. He returned to his duties in town but spent every free moment at the homestead, which increasingly felt like their shared domain rather than Jessamine's alone. Together they harvested the garden, repaired the corral, and added a lean-to for the milk cow Isaac had helped her acquire. One crisp October evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the prairie in gold and crimson, Isaac turned to her with an unusually serious expression. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Winter's coming. Roads will be bad. Might make sense for me to stay out here rather than riding back and forth from town." Jessamine raised an eyebrow. "Are you inviting yourself to move in, Sheriff Blackwood?" A smile tugged at his mouth. "I suppose I am, though I was thinking more permanent than just the winter." Her heart skipped. "How permanent?" Instead of answering, Isaac reached into his pocket and withdrew a small carved wooden box. Inside nestled a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he said quietly. "I've carried it with me since she died, waiting for the right woman to give it to." Jessamine's breath caught as he knelt before her. "Jessamine Morgan, I love you more than I thought possible. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she whispered, tears blurring her vision. "Yes, I will." They were married the following Sunday in Redemption Creek's small church, with the whole town in attendance. Jessamine wore a new dress of deep blue, ordered specially from Sioux Falls, and carried wildflowers gathered from the prairie around their home. Isaac, in a clean black suit that made his eyes appear even bluer, couldn't take his gaze from her as she walked down the aisle toward him. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening, with dancing and feasting and more goodwill than Jessamine had experienced since arriving in Dakota Territory. As night fell, Isaac led her to a waiting wagon decorated with ribbons and flowers by the town's children. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Blackwood?" he asked, lifting her onto the seat. "More than ready," she replied, nestling against his side as they set off toward their homestead, their home. The cabin glowed with lamplight when they arrived, a fire already laid in the hearth. Inside, Jessamine noticed new touches: a larger bed, fresh curtains, a bookshelf filled with volumes she recognized from Isaac's quarters above the jail. "When did you do all this?" she asked, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "Had some help from the townsfolk while you were busy with wedding preparations," he admitted. "Wanted it to be perfect for us." Jessamine crossed to him, winding her arms around his neck. "It is perfect," she murmured, "because you're here." Their kiss deepened, years of loneliness and longing giving way to a passion neither had fully allowed themselves to acknowledge before. That night, they learned each other in ways both tender and fierce, their bodies expressing what words could only hint at. Afterward, as they lay tangled in sheets and moonlight, Isaac traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "I've been thinking about something else," he said. Jessamine was drowsy with contentment. "I'm going to resign as sheriff." That got her attention. She propped herself on one elbow to look at him. "Why? You love your work." "I did," he acknowledged. "But chasing the Hargrove gang made me realize something. I don't want to die with a badge on my chest and leave behind a widow. I want to build something lasting here with you." "But what would you do instead?" His expression was thoughtful. "This land has good water, decent soil. With work, it could support a proper ranch. I've saved most of my pay over the years, enough to buy a small herd to start." Jessamine considered this. "A cattle ranch, horses, actually. I've always had a way with them, and there's good money in breeding stock for the cavalry and for the big cattle operations further south." The idea took root in Jessamine's mind, the two of them building something together, a legacy that could grow and thrive. "I think it's a wonderful plan," she said finally, "though Redemption Creek will be poorer without you as sheriff." "Deputy Hawkins is ready," Isaac assured her. "He's a good man, steady. The town will be in capable hands." Winter descended on the prairie with a ferocity that took Jessamine's breath away. Snow piled in drifts higher than the windows, and wind howled through the night like a living thing. But inside their snug cabin, life took on a sweet rhythm. Isaac worked on plans for the ranch, building new furniture for their home, and teaching Jessamine to play chess during the long evenings. She, in turn, began a small school for the children of nearby homesteaders, holding classes 3 days a week in their front room. By spring, Isaac had officially stepped down as sheriff, and the first 4 mares of their breeding operation arrived, beautiful animals with good bloodlines that Isaac had carefully selected from a breeder in Nebraska. He spent hours in the corral with them, his natural affinity for horses evident in the way they responded to his gentle handling. As the land greened and wildflowers carpeted the prairie once more, Jessamine made an announcement of her own one evening as they sat at their kitchen table. "Isaac," she said, her voice trembling slightly with excitement, "I believe we'll need to add a nursery to the cabin before winter comes again." His fork clattered to his plate. "You mean?" She nodded, her hand moving to her still flat stomach. "The baby should arrive around Christmas, according to my calculations." Joy transformed his face as he rose and came around the table, pulling her into his arms. "A child," he whispered against her hair. "Our child." That summer passed in a blur of activity. Isaac and 2 hired hands expanded the cabin, adding 2 new rooms and a proper kitchen. The horse breeding operation began to gain a reputation, with a wealthy rancher from Wyoming paying top dollar for a yearling colt from one of their mares. Jessamine's small school grew to 12 students, necessitating the construction of a separate schoolhouse near the main road. As Jessamine's pregnancy progressed, her contentment deepened. This life, so different from what she had imagined for herself in Boston, felt more authentic, more meaningful than anything she had known before. Isaac's tender care of her, his obvious excitement about the child, only strengthened the bond between them. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular lightning storm roll across the prairie, Isaac turned to her with a strange expression. "What are you thinking?" she asked, noticing the furrow between his brows. He was silent for a moment, his hand covering hers where it rested on her swollen belly. "I was thinking about how close I came to losing this, to never knowing this happiness." "When you were shot?" she asked, squeezing his fingers. "Even before that," he said. "If I hadn't been in town the day you arrived, if I hadn't offered you a place to stay, if you'd given up and gone back east." "But none of those things happened," Jessamine reminded him. "We found each other." He nodded, his expression clearing. "We did, and I thank God for it every day." The baby, a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Isaac's mother arrived 2 weeks before Christmas during a blizzard that made fetching the doctor impossible. Jessamine labored through the night with only Isaac to help her, his face pale with fear but his hands steady as he helped bring their child into the world. "She's perfect," Jessamine whispered, cradling the red-faced infant to her breast. "Look what we made, Isaac." He sat beside them on the bed, one finger tracing the delicate curve of his daughter's cheek. "She's beautiful," he agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "Like her mother." As Elizabeth nursed, Jessamine leaned against Isaac's shoulder, exhausted but filled with a profound peace. "I never imagined I could be this happy," she admitted. "When Charles died and I had to come west, I thought my life was over, but it was just beginning." Isaac pressed a kiss to her temple. "For both of us. Spring brought new growth to the land and to their family." Elizabeth thrived, a cheerful baby with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined temperament. The horse breeding operation expanded, with 8 new foals that year and inquiries from buyers as far away as California. Jessamine's school, now with 20 students, had become an official part of the county education system, complete with a small salary that she insisted on using to buy books for the children. As the second anniversary of their meeting approached, Isaac surprised Jessamine one morning with breakfast in bed, a luxury she rarely indulged in with a growing ranch to help run and a baby to care for. "What's the occasion?" she asked, settling Elizabeth against her side as Isaac placed the tray across her lap. "Do I need an occasion to spoil my wife?" he countered, sitting on the edge of the bed. She eyed him suspiciously. "You have that look." "What look?" "The one that says you're up to something." He laughed, the sound still a delight to her ears after all this time. "You know me too well, Jessamine Blackwood." He reached beneath the bed and produced a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Happy anniversary a few days early." Inside the package, Jessamine found a leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with her initials. "It's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the supple leather. "I thought you might use it to write down our story," Isaac explained. "For Elizabeth and for any brothers or sisters who might come along, so they'll know how it all began." Tears pricked Jessamine's eyes. "Our story," she repeated softly. "I'd like that." That evening, after Elizabeth was asleep in her cradle, Jessamine and Isaac sat at their kitchen table, the lamplight casting a golden glow over the simple room that had become the heart of their home. Isaac had cooked a special dinner: venison steaks, fresh vegetables from their garden, and a blackberry cobbler that had become his specialty. As they finished eating, Jessamine reached for her husband's hand across the table. "I've been thinking," she said. "A dangerous pastime," he teased, echoing words she often said to him. She smiled. "I was thinking about fate, about how many small decisions led us to this moment, if any one thing had been different." "But it wasn't," Isaac said, his expression growing serious. "We're exactly where we're meant to be." Jessamine nodded, feeling the truth of his words. "When I first came west, I was so afraid. I had nothing but this run-down homestead and my own determination." "You had more than you knew," Isaac countered. "Courage, intelligence, a heart big enough to love a broken-down lawman." "You were never broken," she said fiercely. "Just waiting like I was." He rose then, coming around the table to kneel beside her chair. Taking both her hands in his, he looked up at her with such naked adoration that it stole her breath. "Jessamine, when you first came to my kitchen that morning after staying above the jail, I watched you make breakfast with what little I had in my pantry. You set a plate before me like it was a feast at a fine Boston hotel, not beans and bacon in a dusty sheriff's office." She remembered that morning how nervous she'd been, how determined to show her gratitude despite her uncertainty about the future. "I wanted to ask you to stay right then," Isaac continued. "Not just for breakfast, not just for a day or a week. I wanted to ask you to stay forever." "Why didn't you?" she asked softly. "Fear," he admitted. "Fear that you'd think I was no better than those men who prey on vulnerable women. Fear that you'd say no. Fear that you'd say yes out of desperation rather than desire." Jessamine cupped his cheek in her palm. "And now, what are you asking now?" Isaac turned his face to kiss her palm. "I'm not asking anything. I'm telling you that every day with you has been a gift I never thought to receive. That watching you with our daughter fills me with more joy than I can express. That building this life with you has made me a better man than I ever dreamed of being." Tears slipped down Jessamine's cheeks. "I feel the same," she whispered. "Every day with you is a blessing." "I don't want just your meals at my table," Isaac said, echoing the thoughts he'd had that first morning. "I want forever with you, Jessamine, and I'm grateful beyond words that you've given it to me." She leaned down to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his. "I don't want a meal, I want a forever," she quoted back to him. "That's what you were thinking." "That's what I was thinking," he confirmed. "And what I'm still thinking every day." "Well, Sheriff," she said, using his old title with affection, "you have your forever, and so do I." Later that night, as they lay in each other's arms, the moonlight streaming through their bedroom window, Jessamine thought about the journey that had brought them here. From the depths of despair in Boston to this profound happiness on the Dakota Prairie, every step, even the painful ones, had led her home. Not to a place, but to a person. To Isaac, to Elizabeth, to the family they were building together. As if reading her thoughts, Isaac pulled her closer. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured against her hair. Jessamine smiled in the darkness. "About how the end of one story became the beginning of ours, and how much I love our story." "It's a good one," he agreed. "And the best part is we're still writing it." Outside, the prairie wind sang around their home, the home they had built together from almost nothing. Inside, wrapped in love that had defied probability and circumstance, Jessamine Blackwood knew with absolute certainty that she had found her forever. Not in the grand houses of Boston or the promises of a charismatic husband, but in the honest love of a man who had seen her at her most vulnerable and recognized her strength nonetheless. As sleep claimed her, Jessamine's last thought was of gratitude for the journey, for the struggle, and most of all for the man whose heartbeat synced with hers in the quiet Dakota night. Their forever was just beginning, and she couldn't wait to see what tomorrow would bring.